Have you ever heard the phrase, everything in moderation? It seems to forgive all manner of sins, of the things we decide to put in our bodies. But what harm is there in even a small amount of something? Some amount in moderation has its limits. This tends to get confused. What my guest is going to go over will blow your mind. And I have to tell you, I'm pretty enlightened on this stuff, and it blew me away. And that subject is on trace amounts. So many things that we perceive as bad for us seem to be presented to us in the context of trace amounts, where an amount of something is being qualified by saying a trace or very small amount. Well, how far can we push that? And do trace amounts have an effect on us? No spoilers. The answer to that is in today's episode, and I'm going to bring all of that to you and more. All the exciting news about it right after this. Stick around. You're plugged into the Wellness Broadcast. The show is not intended to replace medical advice by a licensed physician. Hey, it's Frank Sardella. Several decades ago, a chiropractor saved my life, not with treatment, but by making me more self-aware, showing me it's possible to control my own well-being. Now I'm here to pay it forward and help you get yours. And here's what I got today. That's right here, right now, on the Wellness Broadcast. Frank Sardella with you yet again back. Yes, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm so happy to be with you here today. I know I say that every time, but it's been exciting because I'm now getting into the stage of this show where we're having more and more guest appearances. And I'm particularly excited about today's guest. I just watched her on another podcast, and I said, you know what? This girl speaks exactly like I think and exactly like I broadcast. I'm getting her on the show. First of all, I've been doing quite a bit this year. And I've spoken to 25 to 30,000 people over the previous 25 years. I'm now in my 26th year, going on into my 27th year in a few months doing this. And I got to figure out, I'm like, well, 25 to 30,000, that's an impressive amount of people. But when you consider 7-point-something billion and growing on the planet, I got to figure out how to accelerate this thing exponentially. So I've been retooling and revamping, and we've got an amazing juggernaut going right now that I'm very excited about. And this show is very much part of it, and you yourself are part of it, because every person that I meet and every person within the sound of my voice stands to reach. They have no idea how many connections that they have, intimately and even semi-socially. And I am excited to bring this to you because of the amount of help that you can spread to others. And that's the important part of this show. So let's get into the show. What do we have today? I have a guest who's going to talk to you more about structure and function today in a way that perhaps you wouldn't have expected. I love talking to her when we get into conversations, and you'll see very quickly when I talk to her. Part of it is because she's from New Jersey, I'm from New York. She talks like a New Yorker, as far as I'm concerned. And New York and New Jersey are very closely related, and we both hang out in each other's state a lot. We've talked extensively, and we've hung out in very similar circles. She is very much on the level with me in terms of logic and being more self-aware. And folks, I really want you to think of self-awareness while you're thinking of this guest and this episode today, and when you listen to it and pass it along to others to listen to. But she's been doing what she's been doing in some form for over 30 years. She's a mother of 3 and describes what she described to me as the school of hard knocks as most of her education on the subject matter we're going to be talking about today. But very specifically, when I saw her talk to this chiropractor on his show, I texted her immediately while I was watching the video and said, you have to appear on my show. To which she responded immediately, okay, which was, it's twist my arm with her very much. So please welcome here to the Wellness Broadcast for the first time, Jennifer Parese-Silvestro. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Frank. How are you today?
I'm doing great. So great to have you here. I'm happy. This has been a long time coming. And
yeah, it has been. I really appreciate you having me on.
Before we get into what we're going to talk about today, which is nothing controversial, I was wondering if maybe you could, from your standpoint, give a little bit of a, more warm and fuzzy approach to your background and who you are.
Sure. You actually did a pretty good job of it. Okay. So I'm an integrative nutrition health coach. As you said, in some way, shape, or form, I've got about 30 years of background in delving into the holistic mindset, natural eating, natural medicine. I had my first child almost 26 years ago, and she had some issues when she was born. Because of conditions that were going on, I looked into alternatives. and I started using alternatives for the family. So for basically 20 years, I was using homeopathy as a modality, and I started looking into other different avenues like food as medicine. And that led me to become certified so that I could help other people as an integrative nutrition health coach. Along the way, first child, second child, third child, I began questioning the narrative, the vaccine narrative. And, my question came from a logical standpoint. I'm an English lit major, so everything was logic, sentence structure, semantics, look. I worked at a research facility as an admin, putting my way through college, paying my way through college. So I was always in the lab. I had my nose in the lab. I didn't want to just sit at my desk. I was always asking questions. And it astounded me that people who were in the field were the ones advocating the strongest for not doing certain vaccines. And they all had their reasons why. They all had, reasons, and they made sense to me, but I just kept filing the information away. And it wasn't until it hit home that I took a really hard look at it. And, for me personally, certain ingredients didn't fit in with my personal beliefs. And I was fine with that. I was just kind of going along with it. And then things started to hit the fan in the state of New Jersey. And what people started looking at was the fact that it was a freedom issue. It was a right to have autonomy over what's put into your body. And I started to get really educated. And once I started to go down that quote unquote rabbit hole, if you will, I hate to use that because it can be controversial. I learned a lot more than I ever thought I ever wanted to know. And I looked into ingredients, vaccine ingredients, and I looked into the shots that were given to children and my children, other people's children as well. And one of the things that really made me question was, hepatitis B vaccine at birth. Like, why are we giving a 1-day-old newborn a vaccine for basically what is a sexually transmitted disease? The immunity wanes after 5 or 6 years. So it didn't make sense. And the more I questioned, the more it didn't make sense. So for me, it was a logical point. It was a logical progression of looking at things that I never questioned before.
And folks, I want to make it clear, I don't have Jennifer here specifically to argue that point, pro or con. There are two words that describe what I advocate: structure and function. And everything, including and especially the human body, has a basic structure to it. And the structure has everything to do with the function of the body. The body is designed to be structured in a certain way to allow certain functions to occur. And that if you understand that process and you address that process and you operate based on that optimum that it's designed for, you'll never have any argument in your own head or otherwise about what's right to do for that body. And that's what we advocate here. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show. Folks, I just want to make something very clear right now. I am not here advocating or denying things like vaccinations or medicines or whatever. We're just here to discuss basic function of the body. And I want to actually get Jennifer here today to bring us a little bit of a viewpoint coming from that side on how that plugs into our scenario of going through life saying, okay, here's the ideal body. Here's the blueprint that Mother Nature designed. We can all argue about who designed it, where it came from, how long it's been here, but none of that helps us with anything. But if we understand the blueprint exists and we understand inherently how that body does function and should function in its optimum, then everything can be compared to that. And Jen, we're getting you here for that. So now, can you just bring us up to speed on what you and Dr. Rendelstein were kind of discussing that day? Because Doc was very interesting. He was trying to be devil's advocate, and I could tell you were just kind of biting your lip a little bit. And what exactly was it that you guys were discussing at that point?
We were discussing the topic at hand, this very controversial topic. And I don't like to come out on one side or the other. I don't like to influence people unduly. I like to make them think. I like to give facts and data and then give them things that might spark a little bit of a curiosity and have them do their own research on things. That's the way I always liked to live my life. And especially with controversial subjects and things that are not one size fits all. There's a division, as you said, it is controversial. And I think that there's been a divisive tactic there to put people into one camp or the other. And I don't think, you can call somebody an anti quote unquote vaxxer if they did all the shots for their kids and now they've come to a conclusion after research or after seeing with their own eyes that there was a problem.
Yeah.
So what we were talking about, Dr. Reinolstein and I, were, the immune system and how amazingly well structured the human immune system is. How it can find one little bit of pollen or one little bit of peanut butter or one little bit of bee venom and attack that invader, that foreign invader, to the body if the body needs it to attack it. And, I think I was sharing with Dr. Reinolstein and our viewers the bee venom story that I had with the pharmacist.
Right.
That's what you're referring to.
That was the thing that sold me. It was the bee venom story. I love this story.
The bee venom story. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, these conversations happen organically. Listen, again, I'm not out there to rock everybody's world. I'm out there to have a dialogue like you are.
Yeah.
So, I went in, my daughter has a latex allergy, and for school purposes, she needed an EpiPen. So I went into the pharmacy to fill the script, and the pharmacist asked me if I wanted my flu shot. And I said to him, have you looked at the ingredients in that flu shot? And that's how I started the conversation, and he said, no, but they tell us that it's just trace amounts of blah, 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 whatever, preservatives, mercury, aluminum, whatever's in there, adjuvants in the flu shot. And I was like, yeah, that's a good answer. There are trace amounts. And then he said, and it's funny because the conversation just rolls out organically.
Yep.
I have a newborn and I didn't want to give her the chickenpox vaccine. So we talked a little bit about the chickenpox and how it was a normal childhood virus. Mm-hmm. And I happened to be, roll back a little bit 30 years ago when I was working at that research facility. I was working with technician, a research scientist who had a nephew who was in the clinical studies for the chickenpox vaccine. Mm-hmm. So, it's one of those things that kind of stuck with me. So I was like, it started out as a shot for kids who were working parents, and it evolved into something else. So the pharmacist and I were having this dialogue back and forth. And then he said, well, he went back to trace amounts. And I said, let me ask you a question. If somebody gets stung by a bee, and that they're allergic to bees, how much of that venom does it take for that person to have a reaction? And he just went right into it and he said, trace amounts. And I was like, boom, there you have it.
Yes.
And by the way, there's a movie called Trace Amounts that deals exactly with that. Wow. Trace amounts and how the immune system goes into a complete storm to ward off whatever's happening, because the immune system is amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So trace amounts. So.
As a matter of fact, I just brought that up. One of my chiros down in Nashville, I literally just yesterday hijacked his show for one episode without telling him. And I did almost an hour-long episode. And I was just talking about the immune system and the power of it. Like just something as simple as a fever is a immune system reaction. Just your white blood cells alone are part of your body's immune system. It's an army of cells that get sent into an area. And what this mostly reminds me of is one of the things that's most misunderstood is inflammation. Inflammation is like the enemy of everybody, right? Everybody's talking about how inflammation is responsible for a lot of stuff, but it's not the inflammation that's responsible. Inflammation is a symptom. Inflammation is actually just like a fever or a white blood cell count or any other thing that's reacting to something you're allergic to, going in and trying to quadrant off an area and allow it to heal. It's actually a reaction by the body. So it's just very interesting that you're bringing that up in the context of trace amounts. Right. That it's just so kind of serendipitous to the subject at hand here.
Yeah, I think we underestimate the immune system. I think we've been taught, and lots of information is thrown at us, designed to sell products. So, it's easier to turn to something outside of our body to try to, quote unquote, heal what we think is a problem. Like, medicine for fever. Fever's our friend. I'm glad you brought up fever, because that's one of my catchphrases all the time.
Fever's our friend.
Don't stop the fever. Let the fever take its process. Let the fever do its thing. It's burning up bacteria, or, it's necessary. It's a great immune response. And when your body's having a fever process, it's actually a fully functioning immune system.
Right. And it's only when it's insanely high does it become dangerous or whatever. And that's a whole other malfunction of the body or what have you. It's only the temperature's only supposed to go up a certain amount of degrees, but it's supposed to go up a certain amount of degrees, So let's talk about getting infected or getting sick for a minute.
Sure.
Now that the trace amounts story and the bee venom story is out in the open, we've outed you on that. Let's just open up a can of worms here, because it's my not argument but my contention about, again, understanding structure and function. Like like to have us all look at the things that are undeniable. Like, it was funny to watch you and Dr. Rundelstein that day, because he was actually very much like playing devil's advocate and saying, look, let me just take this premise about this vaccine, and I could tell you just bracing up there. Biting that tongue. But at the same time, then you tell the bee venom story and there's something there. And what's funny is I only look to the things in a conversation like that I say, all right, what is observable to us, not just out there, but in terms of self-awareness in your own body.
Sure.
People have gotten fevers before, so they can certainly observe their own body temperature has risen at some point to rise to the occasion, or they've gotten a high white blood cell count in their blood work when some infection existed, and maybe even had an allergic reaction to something, which your allergic reaction is actually a natural reaction by the body trying to fight something. And again, people go and they take Benadryl and they do these different things to suppress the allergic reaction. So you're suppressing the body's ability to fight something, and it's a little scary. The symptoms are scary when that happens, so I can understand why people do that. But let's talk about getting sick and some things that we can't deny. Viruses and bacteria exist in this world. They're a necessary part of life. I've just referenced with one of my docs this morning, complete science fiction, but the movie War of the Worlds, right? War of the Worlds, right? The aliens came to Earth and they were undefeatable except for the fact that they weren't proofed up against our environment. Man spent how many millions of years evolving and developing immunity to or tolerance of bacteria and viruses in our environment, and a few weeks into the aliens coming here and they're all dead. Completely dead, right? So viruses and bacteria are a part of life. They all have some function in life, at least on our own planet. And some of them actually we react adversely to, and they do further develop and develop new strains and things like that. So we can't deny that those things exist. We also can't deny that the body has an immune response. And this is and I would love to get your commentary on this, Jen. My contention is that it's undeniable that bacteria and viruses and things and illnesses exist, but it's also undeniable that wellness exists per a blueprint from Mother Nature. The body is structured in a certain way, the body functions in a certain way, and that depending on how close to that ideal you are determines how immune you are or whatever. In other words, wellness is a sliding scale. Meaning you can be more immune or you can be less immune. I think the reason everybody gets into arguments is because people are saying, if you eat right, you'll totally be immune and bulletproof. And that's just, for lack of a better term, that's just bullshit. It's like you can get bacteria. I always give, and I'll give you one more example and then I'm going to promise I'll let you talk. But like I always talk about, okay, let's just talk poison. Let's just talk poison. We're not even talking bacteria or anything. If you took a very, very ill person and you took an extremely as healthy person as has ever lived on this planet and you put them side by side and you give them both the same poison, which one has a better chance at surviving that poison, right? The really ill person might die from that poison and the other person might get a few symptoms, but they may proof up against it a lot better. Both are going to still get sick, but they're going to have different reactions. So what are your thoughts on it, on wellness being a sliding scale, as it were?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good point that you're making. I like that. Yeah. I always look at people, thanks. I always look at people in the group of, I have a large group of friends who are also similarly holistic, and they look like the picture of health when you look at them. They eat well, they tend to get sick less. There's a glow to their skin. Their eyes are sparkly. And you could see visually with your own eyes, you can see the evidence of what healthy eating looks like. People get sick. It's a fact of life. We are human beings. We're surrounded by, like you said, bacteria and viruses. I think the ratio is like 100 bacteria cells to one human cell or something ridiculous like that. Yeah. So we are surrounded, which is another testimony to, the immune system. The fact that people get sick it's part of life. But the severity of illness and the duration of illness and the frequency of illness is definitely less in people who keep their immune system up. It's funny, I just did a talk. I just launched a YouTube channel, and I did a health fair talk on the immune system just 2 days ago or 3 days ago. It'll be up on my YouTube channel at some point.
Cool.
So, yeah, and it was about that. It was about the things that we can do to build our immunity. Mm-hmm. So that's a personal responsibility. Sleep well, eat healthy, clean foods whenever possible, get fresh air and sunshine and exercise, and, don't discount the healing aspects of touch. So right. People who are connected mm-hmm. and have a support network and do all the, it's old school information, but do all those things that we were told to do when we were growing up, yeah. Those people tend to be healthier. Absolutely. They tend to fight off illness of all types better.
Yeah.
And I think that's empowering. People tend to look at it and say, well, that's victim blaming. And I think it's personal empowerment.
Right.
I am in control of my immune system.
100%.
Much more than I've ever been told,
right.
Much more than we've ever been told. It didn't make sense to me to run for a pill every time there was something going on when things just had their own duration and played out. There's an old saying that if you treat a cold, it'll be gone in 7 days. If you don't treat it, it'll be gone in a week. So
I never heard that. I love that. I'm going to steal that from you if you don't mind. Don't worry, I'll give you credit.
I love it. I stole it from a friend.
Love it. 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think we can both agree, and I think both sides of any argument during these times can agree that being bulletproof is impossible. Like, no one is bulletproof. Mm-hmm. Everyone is subject to disease and illness and sickness, and your body will, the only difference is how is your body going to react to it, and how are you going to heal from it? Because even if you receive a vaccine, even if you receive medicine or anything, even if it's holistic medicine and not pharma medicine, no matter what you do for any illness, it's still, in the end, your body's response that fixes the thing. And that's the thing that I'm trying to open people's eyes on, is that, look, when you listen to these arguments, neither side of those types of arguments, this is why I have Jen here, because she's on neither side of those arguments. And we're not neutral either. We have our beliefs about vaccines, whatever. Jen, I got to share a story with you here, too, that I want to share with everybody.
Sure, awesome.
In January 2019, before all this pandemic nonsense was happening, my parents ended up in the emergency room, okay? Now, they go and they get their flu shot every fall, okay, for as long as I could remember. They're in the doctor's office every other week, and my dad was in his 80s. My mom was just shy of 80. I think she was 79 at the time. Long story short, both my parents got admitted later that day. They were being held in the ER. I was the closest sibling of the children. I have 3 sisters. And it got to the point where even my baby sister flew in from LA, and my other sisters are in New York, and we were all there. But while they were still in the ER for hours, the nurse who was there, who was actually was a veteran employee of the hospital, and I actually verified this with some other nurses as well, shocked me a little bit because it was on her origination. By the way, I don't stop my parents from getting the flu shot every year. I don't caution them on it. What I do is I continually educate my parents on their body. I continually make sure they're doing things to boost their immune system, to make themselves prepared for these types of things. If they want to get the flu shot, that's fine with me. I mean, I'd rather they didn't, based on what I know about the ingredients of the flu shot, and based on having had one once myself, because it was free and my company gave it out. But anyway, I got a shocking piece of data from the nurse, and she asked me, she said, "Did your parents both have the flu shot this year?" And I said, "Yeah." And she just kind of clicks her teeth, and she shook her head back and forth, and this is what she said to me: "We see that all the time."
All the time.
This was a nurse in the emergency room. She was a veteran employee of the hospital. She wasn't some wackadoo lady either. Like, she wasn't like crazy.
Yes.
And I've actually I ran into a friend from high school there who also verified that, who happened to be a nurse on their floor. Ran into her and hadn't seen her in, well, I don't want to say how long, but admitted into the hospital, sicker than sick. They already had the flu shot, and the nurse is verifying that they see that all the time. Now, does that automatically mean all vaccines make people sick and they got sick because of the vaccine? No. It proves they're not bulletproof. There is no medical intervention that is a bulletproof vest. But at the same time, I don't consider any vaccine makes you bulletproof against disease or anything holistic or otherwise that you put in your body, something that bulletproofs you against disease. The body still has to function. Right. There is an exchange of things from the environment that come into the body constantly, and the body responds to them. If it's nutrition, then it has to process it. If it's a foreign invader, it has to process it and do something with it. It's either going to use it for energy, it's going to expel it as garbage, you're going to exhale it, you're going to pee it out, you're going to sweat it out, whatever it is, you're going to do it, and the body's going to have some reaction, but there is no bulletproof sense. And it is, let's face it, folks, I think we've all seen people that can digest food better than other people, right? Who can tolerate dairy more than someone else. You can take two people who claim to be lactose intolerant, and one person can't have any dairy, and the other person can eat butter and can have goat's milk, but can't have any other. And then another person just gets a slight itch when they drink a glass of milk, right? So there's a sliding scale there. You can be slightly allergic to something. You can be severely allergic to something.
What you're addressing there, what you're speaking to is something called bioindividuality. So each person is what we consider a science experiment of one. So what affects you may not affect the next person, may not affect somebody else down the street. So we have to treat each person as an individual. And that's where I start questioning one-size-fits-all medicine when it comes to anything, whether it is antibiotics, whether it's vaccines, whether it's holistic healthcare, whether people are using herbals or whatever it is. You can't assume that what worked for one person is going to work for another. You know, we also forget about the aspect of mind-body connection, of the mind healing, helping to heal the body.
Is true too.
There's a lot that we don't see. You know, with my own children, we were pretty natural in our household. You know, my kids were breastfed. I cloth diapered. I fed them homemade baby food. We didn't use toxic cleaning ingredients. So I feel like they were better prepared to deal with an onslaught of whatever ingredients were in the shots than some others. And we didn't do regular medicine. Like my middle guy's never had an antibiotic. He's mid-20s. Wow. So that kind of addresses what you said there.
Just based on that premise alone, Jen, and this is putting you on the spot a little bit. This has been curious for me. I noticed when we were growing up, I never saw a kid with nut allergies, like ever. Never heard about it once growing up, whatever. This is giving away my age. But all of a sudden, this next generation of children, it's so rampant that any school district you go in, there's signs up, no peanut zone, no nuts. You can't bring a peanut butter sandwich to school anymore. You can't have Reese's peanut butter cups. God forbid you give them out for Halloween. People will egg your house. What is it that you feel like maybe on your bee venom philosophy, like is actually, have you sort of postulated or philosophized about this based on the logic that we employ when we look at these things? I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
So, with regard to peanut allergies, I think that onslaught of chemicals, we didn't have those when we were growing up. We got a lot of fresh air. We got a lot of sunshine. We played outside. Our food was very different. Our food was much healthier 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I'll keep going, 50 years ago, then, because we're similar ages, Frank, you and I. Than it is now. You know, we didn't spray our crops with toxic ingredients. You know, there is a chemical that there was like a $289 million lawsuit settled against a company that was spraying crops with a toxic cancer-causing chemical, which is linked to what's called gut dysfunction. When our gut doesn't function properly, our body doesn't function properly. Our gut is the seat of our immunity, the stomach area, the intestine. So the gut is considered the second brain, and the body sends out those invaders to wall it off. So it has autoimmune issues like allergies, like peanut allergies. Now there is some speculation, and I've looked into it, but I haven't looked very far, that there was a peanut adjuvant used to stimulate an immune response in the body, used in vaccines 20 years ago. And, when you put a foreign invader in and the body comes out and attacks that foreign invader.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard about that either.
Yeah, so it does
Mm-hmm.
save that in its memory cells to attack later when the same foreign invader comes in.
I see.
So it tracks along with the peanut allergies that we're seeing in kids.
Here's what's interesting is I want to point out what's not controversial about what you're saying.
Sure.
Because if we just employ the logic that we're talking about here, right? Just and folks, please look at the logic of this. You may have a child who's peanut allergic, and this isn't an insensitivity, but let's look at the logic here. Let's take an analogy. You go for surgery and they give you anesthesia. That's a consciousness suppressant. It suppresses consciousness. So your ability to be conscious, a function that you have inherently, that's innate, built into you by the blueprint that everyone has. And again, yes, each individual is an experiment of one because they all have different experiences, but they're all off the same blueprint. So anybody you give an anesthetic to is going to go unconscious. Now, some people may need more of that to go unconscious than others, but the fact is it's a sliding scale, and there it is. You can look at anything. You can look at alcohol as a depressant, and that kind of depresses certain motor functions and whatever, and it's actually an invader that's suppressing a function in the body. So anything that's foreign to the design of the body or unnatural to it in terms of what it's used to taking in can have an adverse effect on the functions of the body. And that's all we talk about on this show. And that's why Jennifer is here. To be honest, I'm encouraging everybody to get into the argument of like, look, how is this thing supposed to work? What does it mean when this happens? The reason I'm asking Jen about peanut allergies is not because I want to do a show on peanut allergies. I just want to bring up a point that, hey, have you known of any foreign invasions of bodies that have led to these odd things that we see? One thing you cannot deny is that mine and Jen's generation didn't see any nut allergies, and our the future generation, the next generation after us, seems to have nothing but those nut allergies. So something has changed, genetically or whatever.
So it's interesting. I like the approach that you're taking. People ask me questions all the time, and I share the information that I found, and I'm very willing to step back and say, listen, I found something else that makes more sense than what I was looking at. As the new data comes out, I'll evaluate it. Science is never settled, so our mind should never be settled. We should never look back. We should always look towards what's emerging and what's changing.
Right.
If we see it and it applies and it makes sense. What you said before about anesthesia affecting the mind, that's what we call Occam's razor. It's the straight line between 2 points.
Yeah.
If it's that always makes more sense than a convoluted XYZ thing, whatever that logic could be brought forward. So I tell people all the time, don't just listen to what I'm saying. Don't believe what I'm saying. I'm challenging you to research what I'm saying. Do your own research.
Folks, we're not here to give you medical advice, but we are here to give you advice on being more self-aware. Absolutely. What we're experts in is our own bodies. We're experts in function. Right. We're experts in blueprint. We're experts in what is measurable and experienceable, particularly, and from what Jen's saying here that goes along with what I'm saying, personally experienceable. Jen's not just saying, go research the studies that she found on the internet. She's also saying, look within, look at yourself, look at your own experience that you've had, and kind of go from there and measure it up, right? And any experiences that you've seen or had. I had my parents go in the hospital, and I spoke with that nurse. I observed my parents. I saw that they got the flu shot every single year, and I saw them sicker than I've seen in a long time, and we were worried about them. They were in the hospital for a week. Now, here's something interesting, though. My parents, ever since now pandemic times, they've been staying in. They, on average, were going for probably 2 doctor visits every week on average, and I'm not exaggerating. Like when I would speak to my folks, they were like, we're going to this doctor, your mother's going to that doctor, and it was every single week. And since the pandemic started, they have not been to one doctor. They have not gotten sick even one time.
Wow.
And they have not been on any meds other than the meds that they've been prescribed for whatever conditions they're going through.
Wow.
And it's just amazing to me that I'm not even making a statement based on that. All I'm saying is, folks, if you just observe that and look at it, it's interesting. Yeah. It's very interesting, right? You look at it and you say, that's very curious. Why would that be? Yeah. It doesn't make sense, or it does make sense. a little bit of both, and wow, let me make some conclusions based on that. It doesn't have to be, oh, well, not going to the doctor keeps you well. Like, those are the extreme right side and left side of every argument. Right. There are going to be extremists that say, well, see, that proves that all medicine is bad, and that's not true. All surgery is bad, or all this is bad, right? It has its place. It's, you do need intervention. If when my parents were in emergency status with the flu, they needed to be checked into the hospital to handle it because they were elderly and it could have escalated. If they were 40 years old, they probably could have fought it a little better and the intervention wouldn't have been as sharp. And maybe there would be a little medical intervention. Maybe they needed a little bit of medication, whatever it is, but only as a way to like save the life. And then you start rebuilding from there. And you start, most importantly, tracing back, finding cause and source. And cause and source come from the blueprint of the body. Thoughts on that, Jen?
Very interesting. I love what you said about knowing. Yeah. So there is a certain knowingness that we have, and we should not discount what we know and what we see in front of us.
Yeah.
So, years ago, I had a child who was on antibiotics, and after a few days, she wasn't looking so good. So I pulled out the insert, the package insert, and I was like, way down at the bottom were what was exactly what she was going through. Problems with the sun. She was sitting in the middle of the room. She was like a little catatonic, staring into space.
Wow.
Low muscle tone. So I called up the doctor, and I said, we're having this problem. And he said, well, I'm concerned about her XYZ organ. Uh-huh. And I said, well, I'm worried about the whole child. And he said, well, that's a very little known side effect. It can't be happening. And my response was, I'm looking at the child in front of me.
It's happening right here.
I'm seeing my child. It's happening, believe me. And I said, you're worried about that organ. I'm worried about the whole child.
Yeah.
So for me, as a parent, I knew my child. And as a human being, as an observant, sentient creature, I was seeing in front of me what was happening. Yeah. So I've always used that as a measure of what's going on. You can tell me whatever it is you want to tell me. If you tell me the sky is black and I'm looking up, I'm going, but I see blue. That's my observation. So I should never second guess what's going on and discount my own observation on things. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't profess to be one. You had made a comment earlier that you thought originally when we met that I was a chiro. But it's common sense approach. I'm applying logic to every situation in life, including my own ability to reason, my own reasoning. 100%. And I think that's what is lacking in the world.
Yeah.
We're bombarded with images from everything. We're sort of taking that in, and we're allowing what's being told to us, even if it defies what we know, to influence our knowingness. And I think that becomes problematic because it doesn't allow us to be who we are. It doesn't allow us to embrace that knowledge and embrace the wisdom that is also innate in the blueprint of our system.
And folks, the takeaway from what Jen just said is not don't follow your doctor's orders or defy your doctor. No, I'm being quite serious. The takeaway from this is, and this could have been Jen herself and not her child. It could have been her and her own body, and she was taking the antibiotics. It doesn't matter if it was her or her child or whatever. The point is be an active minimum 50% participant in your wellness care. Okay, I just mentioned this in the podcast that I hijacked yesterday about when you understand structure and function, when you inherently understand what the body is supposed to do, you instantly, without having to consult anybody, can recognize malfunction from a mile away and before it becomes something much worse than it is. So you can see it coming from a mile away, and also you can prevent things from happening in the first place. So that actually puts you in a position of power. However, when things do creep in, unbeknownst to you, and you see that you first recognize that it's malfunction, and when you do need to consult somebody, that you become an active participant. Because Jen, I'll have you answer this. I go out and I do lectures to thousands of people a year. I've lectured to 25 to 30,000 people in the last 25, 26 years. And I remember all the responses I get when I speak to people and whatever. But when I go into a conference room, I always ask uniformly the same question of everybody. Between you and the doctor, when you're sitting with any type of physician, your GP, a chiropractic, doesn't matter who, between you and that doctor, who is in a better position to know what's going on inside that vessel that you possess, that body, between the two of you? And everybody 100% of the time agrees that it's you yourself. And that gives you a responsibility in that. And to me, the way I look at it is, listen, give your doctor a break. Okay, cut him some slack, because that's the odds he's against. He's got people coming to his doorstep all the time, putting this on the table in front of him and saying, fix me, diagnose me, tell me what's wrong with me. And if you don't take an active participation in that, you're putting him at a gross disadvantage, and you're setting him up for failure at least 50% of the time, right? And it's not entirely his fault at that point, because the one thing he cannot do, no matter how great of a physician he is be you. And that's really, if you want to take away from something, a lot of people can take away from what Jen said and said, my goodness, she just put her child at risk. But in her own estimation, from observing what exactly was going on with the child, was said, okay, we've got to weigh out the lesser of two evils here, and we're going to pick the path that seems to be the lesser of two evils, and we're going to go with that. And then I'm sure you did other things to make sure your child lived and healed and whatever beyond that. You didn't just pull her off an antibiotic, but you probably crushed it with nutrition, and you probably did every single home remedy possible, and whatever it is. You went to the ends of the earth. True? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the answer to that was, it was the quick fix, and the easy fix was to put her on the meds prophylactically, preventatively.
Sure.
It was harder long-term for me, because I had to make sure by routine testing, that she wasn't coming down with a recurring infection. So I had to, observe more acutely.
Yep.
I had to, as you said, beef up her body with nutrition. And, at that point we switched over to, rather than disposable diapers, she had pyelonephritis, constant kidney infections. Rather than using disposable diapers, which were contributing in some way to the infection, we switched to cloth. It was a lot more work.
Yeah.
But you're right. And that's, I think, a misconception, that people who don't use traditional Western medicine for everything don't treat, which is not true. I don't not believe in medicine. My approach is a different type of medicine.
Absolutely.
So it's not no medicine. It's not delinquency. It's not abdication of parental responsibility. And I think that's also a misconception that needs to be addressed, that people don't, Thank you for clarifying.
And it's an expanded view. I just want to append that, Jen, with one thing regarding what you just said. And that is that, what Jen actually did here was not a neglectful view. It was an expanded view. If you look at what she said, I love how she said this to the doctor. The doctor was concentrating on a specialty, on one organ. And this is one of the problems with specialists and specialties. When you super specialize, you're isolating one area, and the body is a harmony of function. The organs work in harmony with each other. The organs, the body systems, the muscle groups, the nerves, the synapses, the blood flow, all those things work in harmony. Hormones are going back and forth. They're a communication system within the body. So that harmony is a whole, and that's where you get the word holistic medicine. And what she was very much saying, the doctor was concerned for that one organ, but at the same time, she was looking at the whole child, the entire system, and the harmony. And an expanded view is important, sometimes beyond the body, okay? An extreme example, a relatable example would be if someone works in a coal mine all his life, right? And you take somebody who was a coal miner for 30 years, and that you have to look, the person gets sick, you have to expand your treatment of the person or your investigation of what's going on with the person to that person's environment. There was a TED Talk that I saw one time with an MD who was talking about the future of healthcare. This was only maybe 8 years ago. And this particular MD was talking about a particular patient that he had that was sort of an enigma. It was sort of a mystery to him. And that patient had a condition that he was treating, and he just didn't feel like he was being super successful with this patient. And all they were doing was suppressing and enabling the patient to cope at least some with whatever this condition was. And for some reason, this physician had the instinct to go out to where the patient lived. And he investigated the patient's living quarters. And when he did a little bit deeper of an investigation into her living quarters, beyond what she had even done, he found that there was mold in the environment where she was living, unbeknownst to her. And when they changed the environment, the entirety of what he was treating had dissipated. It went away completely, and there was no need for any more treatment. So not only did he not have to help her cope with it, he was able to help her back to standard function of the body. And the body actually reacts to what's out in the environment. The body is a fortress. The body has functions, and part of that is defense internally so that it can keep stresses in the environment. The environment on planet Earth, I think we can agree between viruses and gravity and weather and temperatures and pressure and all those things, is quite a violent place to live, just basically. I don't mean in terms of like violence in society. I'm talking about the actual physical environment we live in. It's a little bit hostile, and human bodies have evolved to be able to. They're designed to be able to combat that environment. I always give the example of, if you don't believe that your body is capable of handling a tremendous amount of stress and keeping it out in the environment, I invite you to turn on the TV on any given Sunday during NFL football season and watch what those athletes do to their bodies and remain in tip-top shape week in and week out. They put their bodies under tremendous amounts of stress. And yes, they get injuries, and yes, things do happen. But look at the tip-top performance they're capable of. And you and I are complaining about, our back pain from the mattress we're sleeping on or whatever it is, right? But the human body is designed to combat a tremendous amount of stress and keep it on the outside. You're not supposed to take in stress and wear it on the inside. And should it get in, the body does have certain defense systems to push it back out. But sometimes when structure and function are not, when they are adversely affected, especially the basic structure of the body, people actually experience stress invading and remaining in there. And this is what you get when you say, I tend to hold my stress in my fill-in body part here, right? In my shoulders, in my back, in my neck, wherever. Or maybe you carry it digestively and you got a nervous stomach or this or that, or you have ulcers. And the human body is actually designed to keep that stress out in the environment, and it's capable of incredible things. And what Jen here just shared with us is that expanded view, looking at the environment, looking at the design of the body, looking at what's being put into the body, looking at the actual product issued by the company that issues the product, research that's inserted with the product, and reading up on it and its implications on human bodies when it's injected in there. It is a foreign substance. All medications are foreign substances. They're poisons to the human body. And some of those effects that those poisons have are healing effects, but many of them that get labeled side effects are not really side effects at all, but those effects are just effects, right? So this particular poison does these 100 things, 2 of which have healing properties that heal this, but 98 of which damage these things in the process. So as you can see, medicine has some use, but it's not designed for long-term use. Because on the long term, this is why people get on medications for medications. This is where I started out. Why I do the wellness broadcast, why I've been lecturing for more than 26 years now, after a chiropractor saved my life, because I was on that roller coaster. I was on that. It was a roller coaster that was permanently going downhill. There were no uphills anymore. And why I would get on a medication and that wouldn't solve it, because I was giving myself new problems the whole time. It doesn't mean all medicine is bad to say that. And that's not what Jen is saying here. That's not her point. So Jen, I want to thank you for bringing up that point. So what I'd like to know is, how can people either reach out to you, follow you, that kind of thing? Sure. What are the best ways for that to happen?
Sure. So a couple ways. Dr. Reynolds and I do a Facebook Live twice a week. We do it Mondays and Fridays at 10-ish on a page called The Coronation, the Coro, C-O-R-O, Nation.
Yeah.
We started this when coronavirus came out to give people, someplace positive to go and something to focus on, to give them productivity during this, we thought was going to be a 2-week lockdown. Here we are a year later, still doing it. Still doing it. So I'm on there. And the website, You can find me at genxtalks.com. And if you pop over there, you can leave your first name and your email address, and I will gladly send some information and keep you posted on what's going on in the world, in the world of health and wellness, and, how to help you cut through what seems to be an overwhelming amount of crazy information. So again, it's like genxtalks.com.
And that's JENNX talks.com.
That is correct, Frank.
Cool.
JENNX talks.com.
And you'll find Jen's, as she calls it, investigative wellness there. And all things investigative. Exactly. She's the PI. She's the Dick Tracy of wellness investigation.
Investigative wellness. I am the modern day Nancy Drew.
Nancy Drew. There you go. There you go. Absolutely.
Yep. Jenny Drew.
Okay, cool.
I speak to things that I've found. I wished 30 years ago I had someone to hold my hand and walk me along in the journey. And I did a lot of it on my own. So I'm doing what's called investigative wellness. Love it. Wellness with people.
Love it. So, Gen X doing Gen X. And JENNX, not GENX, folks. Very, very interesting. Jen, I want to thank you for being here today. It was very enlightening and also very validating to me. You were backing up everything I say on the show. And you see, folks, I brought Jen here just to prove how right I am all the time. No, I resonate with what she says and have a lot of respect for her. So, Jen, I hope to have you back one time. I think it'd be a lot of fun to. We can. There are 100 topics you and I could do together. So, hopefully, you'll want to come back. Okay.
With pleasure, and thanks for having me on, Frank. I appreciate it.
Awesome, Jen. And for you folks, I want to thank you for indulging me for this time. It was especially wonderful having Jennifer here. Ever since the bee venom story, I absolutely had to have her here. And I'm just delighted that she was able to bring that out on you. And think about her bee venom story. Of course, I don't want that to be the only takeaway from this episode, but I kind of do. I want it to be sort of a main takeaway. I sort of want it to be this stable thing that you can look at that gives you sort of a way of looking at things. Trace amounts is brilliant because that tends to be the argument on many of these things that were offered. Even when we talk about pesticides, folks, I can tell you one of the reasons I buy organic coffee is because of pesticides, okay? I know one doctor who actually opened my eyes to something, not as controversy. He just mentioned, he asked how many cups of coffee a day I drink, and we actually did the math of how many pounds of coffee per year I drink, and it turns out to be enough beans to comprise one entire tree of coffee, which is quite huge, okay? And I forget what the poundage was. But now look at the coffee that you're choosing. That coffee having had pesticides sprayed on it, the amount of pesticides that I was intaking, pesticides which interrupt the endocrine system, the communication system of the body that communicates with these chemicals called hormones, that make the organs and glands communicate with each other and develop these body processes that are supposed to happen, actually get interrupted by many of these chemicals that they're spraying with the intent to kill life that's getting on the bean and eating the bean or diseasing the bean. They're trying to kill that off. And the argument is it's a trace amount, but when you add it up over time, it's no longer a trace amount. But even if it was a trace amount, by that argument, by what Jen said today, what about a trace amount of bee venom to somebody who's severely allergic to bees? I brought up nut allergies. Jen didn't even intend on speaking about that. What about if you give 1/16th of one peanut to a child who's severely allergic to nuts? Would you safely do that? Would you give them 1 crumb of a peanut? I know people who have children with peanut allergies. They don't want any peanuts within several yards of their child. They don't want them to come in contact with it, let alone ingest it. So trace amounts are not safe in terms of the context that they're being considered within. Trace amounts can be dangerous and often are, depending on what it's a trace amount of. If it's a trace amount of vitamin C, it may not be effective as vitamin C in the body because it's not nearly enough, but that trace amount certainly can be considered harmless, but it can also be considered valueless at that point, conversely. but a trace amount, you say, well, if you get a trace amount of gasoline in your system or ammonia in your system, fine. But what does that really do on a cellular level? Maybe you don't notice the symptom, so it's not uncomfortable to you, but it still could be doing the same amount of damage. And that's really the only point we're talking about here. We're not here to scare you. We're not here to tell you vaccines are bad or medications are bad. This is here to open your eyes and become more self-aware. And that's what I wish for you from today's episode. So thanks to Jennifer, we were able to have a nice discussion about it, give even more examples to open your eyes even more. And I hope that that just makes you more vigilant and makes you consider more and have an expanded view of the situations that you're looking at, and also have an expanded view of what advice you take, whether it's from YouTube or whether it's from your physician. And this is not, let me reiterate, not to imply that you should ignore your physician's orders. That would be a complete misinterpretation of what this platform and this show is about. We say in the beginning and end, this is not meant to replace the advice of a professional licensed physician, and you shouldn't take anything here and supersede any orders you get from any doctor. But you should take what you learn here to become more of a participant in the relationship you have with that doctor and give him a break. Give him the support that he needs to understand more about yourself, because you'll help him help you even more. And you may help yourself find the right physician for you to work with you. That will push you in the direction of more life, more wellness, because wellness is, after all, a sliding scale. You can be more well or less well. You can be more immune or less immune. And therefore, the effects that happen to you can be greater or lesser in either direction, positive or negative. And that is entirely up to you how much. So what I wish for you is to go forward and create as much wellness for yourself as possible. Become as immune as you possibly can. And don't develop the false sense that anything's going to make you bulletproof. Whether it's the argument of one side saying nutrition only, medicines are bad, and nutrition is going to make you bulletproof, or chiropractic adjustments are going to make you bulletproof, or whether it's on the other side that says vaccines are going to make you bulletproof and medications are going to make you bulletproof. Neither side is going to make you bulletproof. There is a human factor in there. There is a cellular level factor that is in there, and there is life itself. And you can understand how life operates, how it's structured, what its blueprint looks like, and how it's supposed to function. And there's a lot of false information out there about that as well. We don't want to get involved in any of that. We want to make you the observer of the environment. We want to give you an expanded view, and we want to mostly make you more self-aware. And that in itself is the purpose of this show and why I encourage you to keep listening. So please keep listening, make those great choices, great decisions, become a team player in your own wellness, and become as well as you possibly can by getting more and more educated. And I'm going to help you do that by continuing to bring these episodes and these guests to you and these topics to you, to give you more of that viewpoint. Please take that viewpoint. Thank you again for attending. I've got some great guests and some great episodes coming up for you. So stay tuned right here. Keep it tuned right to this podcast. Reach out to me, Instagram at The Wellness Broadcast. Follow us there. And you can DM me there. Slide into DMs and ask me any question you want. Give me suggestions on topics and different things like that. If you want to look at how to approach a situation or what have you. No, I'm not a doctor, but I can give you advice on how you should approach a situation. Of course, if you have an urgent medical situation, seek medical attention. Do not take this as a replacement for that. And above all, be smart out there. Look at your own integrity and say, all right, what have I experienced? What can I experience? What can I learn? And if you have to have medical intervention, it doesn't mean you have to drop finding cause and you have to drop figuring out how to take better care of yourself and make yourself more immune and more well while you're intervening with whatever intervention you have to have, even if it is antibiotics or a vaccine at this point. That is the point and the takeaway. I want to thank you for being here, and I'm ready for another episode. How about you? So on behalf of myself, my guest, Jennifer Parese-Silvestro, and the rest of the Broadcast Wellness crew, I thank you so very much for joining us here, and we'll see you next time for another episode of the Wellness Broadcast. Be good. You've been listening to The Wellness Broadcast, a Broadcast Wellness Network production. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved. Executive producer, Frank Sardella. For more information, visit thewellnessbroadcast.com and follow on Instagram @thewellnessbroadcast.